Welcome back to Interpolation podcast. I'm Leo. I'm here with my friend Vivek. Today,
Hi guys.
we're going to talk about greetings. Today, we're going to talk about software ethics and kind of in a broad way. We have some ideas, and before we get started, just wanted to remind you, please subscribe to our channel if you want to see more content like this. We'll be having some fascinating conversations all the time. Make sure you click subscribe, and of course, like the video if you like it. And without further ado, let's get started. So the topic today is about software ethics. So some of you may be up on current events about, for example, some companies developing AI models, putting, kind of restrictions, ethical restrictions on what they want their software used for. Like, for example, no mass surveillance, no automated, weapons control and things of that nature. You could guess who the company is, but we're not going to name it. And this is none of this is going to be political. We're talking strictly about software ethics. The politics are a distraction, so let's not even get into that. And my position on this is simple. If you create software, you have the right to dictate or to at least explain to the world how you want your software used and how you want your software not to be used. And this has been the case for since the beginning of time when it comes to software. Everybody signs whether you read it or not, you sign an end user license agreement, either explicitly or implicitly when you use software, or some kind of service agreement when you use software as a service, for example. So, and if you read the terms of service, you'll see that there's things that you can do and you can't do with the software. So this is all very normal. And I think what's kind of interesting these days is the power of some of these technologies and what they can do at scale that we weren't able to think of before, to where the vendors are really thinking about what the impact on the world is, and they're actually putting some very specific terms. So I think I've talked enough about it to kind of introduce it. Vivek, I know you're passionate about this as well. So why don't you, kind of give us your perspective on software ethics in general and maybe other angles as well.
Yeah, so at a broader level, it's not just software, but whenever someone builds a tool, right? The question has always been whether they owe some responsibility to as to how the tool is going to be used, right? Um, the in the middle in the before the scientific revolution and modern thought process, there was probably all kinds of rules about what you are allowed to do and what you are not allowed to do. You couldn't even use certain weapons without worshipping them or something like that. There were always these kind of gatekeeping in terms of how tools could be used. Tools, in fact, could only be used by, at least in our in the Indian society, for example, there were some tools which could be used only by certain demographics of people, and it was kind of like their trade, and they work with those. But as the scientific revolution came and knowledge became free and inquiry was basically unshackled, um, the world has always said that it's okay to invent anything, right? You can build anything you want, you can think of anything you want, you can create anything you want. And then as the nation states got more savvy, so to speak, and they started having these methods of control and, making sure everyone uh, does the right thing, more or less, according to their own perspective. So you have these restrictions about how you're supposed to use a certain bit of software or whatever. So I can think about back in the early days of Netscape Navigator. I think this was the 90s. The US would not allow high grade encryption software to be exported, right? So the
Right.
rest of the world was using an encryption
And
which
by the
was
way,
technically.
sorry to interrupt you, but we're talking like what 128-bit encryption. So by today's
Yes.
standards, it's
Yeah.
not that high, but at the time it
It's
was quite high.
it's
So
literally
go on.
trivially breakable. So it was, I guess
Right.
it was not trivially breakable, but it was potentially breakable by the NSA. The NSA probably couldn't break it, but they knew that if they wanted to, they could. They had to protect their own interests, the interests of the US government and the people, so to speak. So the question is, at what point does the gatekeeping become less of safety and more of self-interest, right?
Okay.
So what about, say, something open source software that lets people communicate with anyone else in the world? On the one hand, it's freedom. On the other hand, a lot of unruly elements are going to use that, to create more chaos in the world. So is this? It's always a razor's edge of ethics, right? you have to walk the edge, and if you lean to one side, you run the risk of falling a long way down that side, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and there's no way back in a lot of cases.
There's
I
no
mean,
back,
once you go over the edge, then then
right?
then it kind of justifies the next thing and the next thing, and it just keeps getting worse, right? So
Right.
it's really from my experience. Um, and by the way, sorry to digress a little bit, but I'll talk just how I see ethics in general. And one of my mentors long ago told me, if it feels wrong to you, then it's unethical. And
Right.
and again, he was assuming that I'm a rational person. I'm not a megalomaniac, not too much of a megalomaniac. Um, I don't want to destroy the world. I don't want to enslave people. So my kind of personal values pretty much guide my moral compass, and they're generally ethical. When things are not ethical or they're kind of shady, they just feel wrong. So of course, I don't even entertain them. Um, and what ends up happening is that it's one of those things where, and you see the same behavior with even conspiracy theorists, right? They believe something really innocent that's not true,
Mhm.
and then that now open there's research on this. Now this opens the door to believing just about anything. And we've seen that in certainly in this country with people that started off believing things about, like, just trying to find ways to make healthy food for their children, and they ended up being like full anti-vaccine, anti-government, and these were like suburban moms, right? And this is kind of
Mhm.
how this stuff started, because
Yeah.
once they believe that one falsehood, then it kind of reinforces their ability to believe other stuff. And when it comes to the ethics, is once you say, that's not really that's not really right, but it's not that wrong, then it's a straight shot down to, like, complete evil from there, right? And you just keep justifying the next worst thing, after the other. So it's really important to stay, you can push to the edge, but you need to know where that edge is, and you need to stay on it. And if it's okay, I wanted to ask you one question, because you mentioned, and you brought up some very interesting Indian history that I'm not terribly familiar with, but
Yeah.
obviously, you are. And you
Yeah.
mentioned that only certain people were allowed to use tools. There was religious context. And then there were demographics associated with it. Was that because the advanced tools were scarce, or because people were trying to maintain
I
control
think
over some?
it boils down to it's the caste system basically, which
Yes,
kind of put people into slots of trade or function basically. And you're not supposed to go outside the function. So even if you
right.
are skilled enough to use a spear or a sword, you're not allowed to fight. You're not allowed to learn how to fight, because that's the job of the warrior, and your job is to do whatever you were born into, right? And
Yeah.
there's plenty of mythology and stories about people who broke those things, and things like that happened. So the system itself was not universally accepted by everyone, right? Because they were, obviously, if they write some stories about it, obviously someone's trying to complain about it, right? The but in some ways, the modern world does work like that, right? You there's no I wouldn't say it's a feudal system where you kind of put superiority and hierarchies in place, but a doctor is a doctor. You don't allow someone who's just read a medical textbook to treat someone. And
Right.
more and more is the case that you need to have certain certifications to handle certain things. Even companies need to do all sorts of compliance and all sorts of auditing to be allowed to do a certain kind of business, or create a
Well,
certain kind of software, right?
and to this day, in the modern sort of software world, at least in this country, and in my country, you're not allowed to export software to certain other you know
Right.
nationalities. And then if it falls under a certain security sort of categorization, it's even more restricted.
Right.
It's now you get into export control. So by default, there's like four countries you can't export software to. You can guess which ones they are. But
Yeah.
then once you get into an export control case, now you're like, you're very restricted. And there's rules about who can touch the software, who can touch the data, what nationality they can be, etc. Because it does have, to your point earlier about, doing the right, just doing right, protect safety versus self-interest. Um, it's kind of like a weird blurry line of both. When you think about, a nation state that's of course interested in maintaining its, status in the world, its superiority, etc. And you can guess the United States is very
Mhm.
very interested in maintaining our military superiority and all these different things.
Right.
Then yeah, that is self-interest. But on the other hand, at least, and I say this kind of tongue in cheek because we're the only nation to ever have detonated nuclear weapons against other people.
Right.
But on the other hand, we also realize that there are if other nations had that capability, we think they would do way worse than what we did at the time, and for kind of different reasons. So with weapons that are now hundreds or thousands of times more powerful than they were before, we were talking about fission bombs versus fusion bombs, right? So it's kind of an extreme
Mhm.
example, but we do have
Yeah.
both a self-interest as well as an interest for the world that these what things don't fall into the wrong hands. And we've proven, at least since right after we nuked another country, we've proven that we've never
Mhm.
done it again. So it's okay for us to have these things. So again, I say it
Mhm.
a little tongue in cheek, but
Yeah.
it is kind of a blurry line. So maybe why don't you talk about what you see the differences between self-interest and kind of preserving kind of safety and the common good are.
So I think there's one extreme of person who wants freedom above all else, right? Like if you look at the open source movement, the open source movement started with the idea of radical freedom, completely radical. That
Yes.
there is no, there's not a single iota of non-free stuff, right? You create the software, you don't restrict how anyone does anything to it, except that they need to share it, right? And that's
Right.
kind of the extreme case. And then you have to look at the other end of the spectrum where you have completely proprietary software where you can't use it outside of the terms and conditions that has been agreed upon. But then you have to meet it somewhere in the middle. I think both extremes have extreme danger, right? Like if everything
Sure.
was open
Well,
source, then everyone has the ability to do everything. And similar to what AI is right now, right? Can you deliver? Is this tool really capable of being? I'll give you an example. I'm an avid motorbike rider. Once the larger capacity motorcycles started coming to India, right, and more people got access to them, the roads became so much more dangerous because where someone was like limited going at 60 mph, now they're like 100 mph is easily possible, and there's not been that maturity to grow into it as the technology developed. Just given a hugely improved technology without the infrastructure for it, right? And
well, by the
that's the
way, sorry,
problem.
sorry to, but
Yeah.
in the U.S., we're seeing vehicles today driving on roads and bridges, by the way, that on average weigh double or triple what they weighed when those roads and bridges were built.
Right.
And also they have different performance characteristics. Of course, there's all kinds of technology that assists the driver, but at the end of the day, these are not drivers that train to drive, say, a 1-ton vehicle. Now they're driving a 3-ton vehicle.
Right.
And you're looking at a situation where, if I'm not mistaken, um, it's like the leading cause of death, certainly among young people in the U.S. behind among young people in the U.S. and then overall behind cancer and heart disease is automobile accidents. So
Right.
what you're talking about India, I mean, it's a different context, but the same thing is happening. Like
Yeah.
technology, the availability of these very high end, sort of capable tools just became available, and people weren't required to be retrained to operate them. We have bridges that are collapsing under the stress, all these different things, right? And it's very difficult to um, to kind of control. It's hard to put the genie back in the bottle, is what I'm trying to say. So
Right.
you can't just say, well, you can't drive your car anymore unless you go get training. Well, that's people are gonna just run out into the streets, right? If you said that, and I think
Right.
the same is true if somebody told you you can't ride your high powered motorcycle, all of a sudden, right? So
Right.
yeah, sorry
So,
for the digression,
so it
but I thought it
cuts
was
both
interesting.
ways. I mean, there is a demographic of people who benefit largely from the completely free ecosystem, and there's a demographic of people who will completely misuse that. So I'll go back to a short science fiction story wherein three scientists
Oh, is
discover
this
that
Asimov? This
no, it's
Asimov?
not Asimov. It's a book
Oh
of
wow. Okay, yeah, please
it's not
continue.
Asimov. It's from a book called the 50 Short Science Fiction Collection. So the
I'll
50
put it on
best
my list.
short, I think it's called. It's curated by Asimov and a couple of others. So these are 1 or 2 page stories. It's very entertaining.
Sure.
So one of the stories is about three scientists who discover explosive so potent that a few grams of it could annihilate the entire Earth, right? And they want to have dinner to discuss whether they should reveal that to the world or not, right? So the wife of one of the scientists says it would be a good idea to host a dinner at their place, and she hosts it and she poisons the three of them, right? That's the
Right.
that's the end of the story, because she has a kid and she can't bear that even her husband, or a very ethical person or whatever he is, he's still human, right? And the
Right.
temptation to, you know, misuse that is too high, right?
Yep.
It's just too high.
Well, whether it's the temptation or he's coerced or
Yeah.
there's ways to extract information out of people, unfortunately, and there's people in this
Right.
world that are very skilled at doing that. Some ways are
Right.
money, of course. Everyone supposedly has a price, but if that doesn't
Uh,
work, there's psychological ways. There's I
yeah.
mean, just look at what's
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah. So, yeah, on the one hand, it's also a fool's errand, because uh, if you don't invent the atomic bomb, like if the US hadn't invented the atomic bomb, here,
Someone else would have done it,
Germany,
right? Yeah.
Hitler would
Yeah.
have, right? So
Exactly.
it's like, should you keep should you keep trying out everything just to make sure that someone else can't, misuse that? Or I don't know. Sometimes it feels like the human race needs. I don't know, one of those science fiction plots. The human race needs control by an alien force,
I
which has the
say
highest
this,
kind of.
Vivek, all the time. I say because I look at the world, and with all due respect, I mean, I love humanity in general, but the world is on fire and we're doing some really stupid things to each other.
Yeah,
And I
we
think that
are
the only
essentially
thing that's
children.
going to stop that, we're acting like children. The only thing that's going to stop that is if some superior race from outer space comes and says, "Okay, now we're going to kill you all." That's the only thing that's going to put us unified as a species
Yeah,
to put our heads together, stop trying to kill each other, and work toward a common goal. I don't think there's anything else that would do that. Climate change
yeah,
is not doing it. I mean, there's a lot of lip service, but at the end of the day, it's very self-serving in a lot of cases.
mhm,
In a lot of cases.
yeah,
Cancer, AIDS research, all these things. I mean, there are lots of efforts into that, but there's not like this common goal. Um, I can't help but think of like John F. Kennedy, right? And this was not a world goal; it was an American goal. But this kind of leadership that says we're going to put a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth before the decade is out. We don't have
mhm,
anyone in the world saying we're going to cure this terrible disease, or we're going to figure out how to reduce emissions by this date, and everybody gets on board and does it. There's so much self-interest being dealt, that and misinformation and all these different things that prevent us as a species from unifying that way. So I think the only thing that's going to happen is if suddenly spaceships are targeting us and shooting us. And it's like, yeah, you
yeah,
can't make that up. Like that's actually happening. So let's figure out how to stop this thing, right?
yeah,
And I, it's amazing. But to your point, I guess the what's really interesting now is what we're seeing is the people that stand to profit the most from a technology. If you think about that company we're not going to name that tells a very powerful government, you're not allowed to use this for these use cases, those use cases would probably multiply that company's revenue by 100, right? If they actually
yeah,
allowed it. And they're saying,
yeah,
no, this is just, you're talking about being able to kill everybody on the planet with an agent or
mhm,
with an agentic system. We're not going to allow that. Even though it's going to make us all kinds of money, this is wrong. We're not going to allow it. So it's almost like even people that are driven by profit motive now, and I'm not saying that this company is driven purely by profit motive, but of course it's a for-profit company. They should be driven to some extent by
yeah,
profit motive. Are saying no, there's things that you just can't do, and you're seeing it now with the slow release of their other model, and
mhm.
so forth. Um, so what does that say about us? Um, I'm doing an aside here, that we can't even agree on sensible regulation. We have to wait for the people that would benefit the most from the misuse of their technology to say, no, you can't use it for that. What does that say about humanity?
Yeah. It's a very curious paradox of a mixture of the worst and the best, right? And
Right.
you don't know until it's actually tried out. I mean, you don't know who's the winner, who's the you know who's good, who's bad. I was reading a very um provocative article on a Substack. I might share it with you later. It's not easy to stomach, but basically, it's about people who, during wars and other situations of crisis, had to rely on people who were ethically highly compromised, right? And had to
Yes.
look at them doing things which no modern civil society would accept as, you know, acceptable.
Right.
But those people were
Right.
helping them save lives of soldiers, of,
Yes.
whatever.
Yes.
So they had to rely on them.
It's
So,
Machiavellian, right? I mean, to some
yeah,
extent, it's how we justified deploying the atomic
yeah.
bomb. It's like,
And
hey, 1,000,000 people are
yeah,
going to die if we don't kill 200,000, right? That was
yeah,
the rationale that we
that
had.
was the
Imagine making
rational.
it.
Yeah. And that is the problem, is that ethics is never about white and black, right? Every one of us is gray. Every action we take
Yes.
has negative effects on the world, whether it's environment or some, some supply
Yes.
chain somewhere is hurting someone, right? It doesn't matter
Right.
where you're from. No one is completely blameless and completely untainted. Someone who doesn't taint the earth with
We
their
can only
with,
do the best we can, right? And I think most of us try, but to your point, there are things that everything's so connected that you just don't know if you squeeze here what happens there, right? This is the problem.
and you know what? The people who are actually the most pessimistic about the world, people like me, like if you have some experience of how people think, and if you have seen a few things in life, then you realize you will obviously become a nihilist, right? Or should I say nihilist, how you pronounce it.
Right.
um
Yes.
you wonder whether it's all worth it. Like, what if the earth was just vaporized in one go, right? Everyone's thought
Right.
about, like, this world is just too much of chaos and suffering and misery to exist. Maybe you should just leave the plants and the animals behind, right? Obviously they'll have misery, but they won't be creating excess misery like an assembly line.
Yeah, but the
So
problem with
then,
that, because
on the other hand, right,
I go
knowing
ahead.
the nature of humans to be flawed, is where you can appreciate the fact that despite this very base nature of human beings, we still have the majority of society is not bloodthirsty and
Right.
you know uh,
Most people just
doesn't.
they want to live in peace. They want their families to be safe. They want to be healthy. They want to live a reasonably good life. They want to have nice things. They want to eat good food. This is like
Yeah.
the normal human being in the world, right? We just kind of
chaotic
disagree on the
behavior
little.
is the chaotic behavior is an outlying behavior which people
Yeah.
fall into when they're provoked. And you see some societies where such behavior is programmed out of the folks. Like, right, there are a lot of people I've seen who will not take to using swear words. They would not resort to violence at any cost. It's kind of like the culture is programmed them. And this is where culture comes in. And although a lot of people will disagree about the benefits of religion, religion evolved for a reason, to
Yes.
help people, give the people an answer, and a book and a kind of guideline as to how to behave in a certain situation. And
Right.
sometimes it's better to have consistency in behavior which can be managed than to have unpredictability of freedom, right? You don't know how
Yeah.
someone's going to react.
I agree with you. Before that, people were sacrificing infants. There's a
Yeah,
reason why they came and said, okay, no, it's not okay to kill people, right? Like this is not what we
yeah.
want. So it served its purpose.
So religion has been a kind of a evolutionary adaptation, right, for societies to cooperate and be more controllable, which is a good thing actually, because even
Yes.
animals have their own, have their rules, and they have their rituals. They have all those controlling things. But the thing is, we've outgrown them very fast. Now, in the absence of traditional religion, which deals with things which don't exist anymore, deals with notions and problems which you don't have anymore, you
Like
end up with,
we know what makes rain. We know what, like
yeah,
there's things that we learned, much later,
right,
and we don't have to go back to the
yeah,
scripture to figure out why, right? Yeah.
yeah. And what happens is people need answers to questions, and religion gives it kind of like a prepackaged answer, right? And
Yes.
prevents them from worrying about that. They can think about more practical things. But now then you have much more complex problems. Like, like why do people, some people have more money, why do some people have less? And we end up with similar religious like beliefs, like say Marxism is you could call it a religion because it starts with certain axioms about how economics works, and it takes it to its final conclusion, and it becomes a religion as soon as it starts making um, what do you call recommendations as to how you're supposed to behave, or rather
Yes.
rules.
Yes.
Until the point
And it
where
can
you
also,
don't
it can also
recommend.
turn into a cult, very easily turn into a cult where even in the face of facts and reality, and I'm not talking about just what you named, there's other things too. Um, People are like, nope, that's not what this says. This is what we need to do. What you're telling me is fake news or false information or whatever. I believe this, and because in some cases the leader said this, and that's it. There's no argument, right? So that's very much a cult. That's not even a religion that sponsor spirituality. This is like, no, these are the 10 rules. And if you don't believe
And
them, then
yeah,
you're out. Yeah.
and it boils down to a kind of a basic human need to not feel responsible for their own problems, right?
Right.
Like as soon as you're given an answer as to why something's broken, which doesn't depend on you, it's very easy to accept that and roll with it, because then you can outsource this. The solution is no longer the problem is no longer you, right? The fact of the matter is, every individual being is the one who needs to change in order for the world to change,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
It doesn't matter how many people you reform. It would be better if each person reform themselves, the best persons
Yes.
who can do it. It's so,
Yes.
uh, running back to software ethics, right? As an
Thank
individual
you.
software developer, right? As an individual software developer, it is, I think that's where it has to come eventually, right? If everyone's just doing what is said, then that's not a nation, right? That's a dictatorship. So even if you're told to, there's a certain code of ethics. I've been offered projects back in my freelance days where I had to do things which are related to spam, or sending out a lot of mails, or the kind
Right.
of pyramid scheme stuff and all that, and I refuse them because I want to leave the world in a better place than I came in. And if I can be less of a pain to the world in any way, then even if it means that something that I want isn't money or whatever is not available to me by refusing that, I want to do that. The
Yep.
question is, where do you bring? How do you get ethics from? Like, religion is basically obsolete. Culture is very fragmented, right? Each
Yes.
community, each
Very tribal.
country
It's also very
has,
tribal.
it's very
Yeah.
tribal. So what is the way in which you infuse ethics into children, or how do you define even what's civil behavior? Like, I
That's a
find that,
really good question. Yeah. Go ahead.
yeah. So I've been to Bhutan recently, and one of the things that I noticed that the people there are not materialistic, right? They've kind
Right.
of had a culture where they didn't want much stuff, but then now there's the internet and there's TikTok and all that stuff, so the young people want more. So they have a problem with people leaving the country. Young people leaving the country, they go to Australia, they go to Japan, they go to any of the Southeast Asian countries, which to which they have free entry, and they want to work there and they want to live a kind of a Western life. So, but the country itself is carbon neutral, or rather carbon negative. They reduce more carbon than they put out. I mean, they take it out of the atmosphere, and they don't allow. You know, they're against this whole building more and more stuff. They want
Sure.
things. They want things to be as they were, right? And that thing is still there in people's minds, even though they are westernized. But it's changing. And one of the good things I noticed about them is when they pray to their deities, uh, they always pray for the good of the world. They say, "I want everyone to be happy." Right? They never pray for
Okay.
personal things. They say,
Right.
"Okay, God, I want to be. I want this, but my prayer is that everyone should be happy and everyone should be wise." So that kind of you should call it programming, because from a purely scientific point of view, it's a cultural programming, and it's worked, right? They haven't
But
ruined that
stop you for just
ecosystem.
1 second. What you're talking, just to go back and answer your question, how do well, it is programming, but you're saying how do we teach our kids this? Well, I think there's two ways. One is you teach them that there's something bigger than you, and it's called the world. It's called other people. It's called fellow human beings, fellow humanity. You need to think about that when you do your actions, and this is what you're saying. You pray to the deities or the deity, whatever you believe in, to have, to not just for what you want, but for what the world should want. The second thing is you need to teach your children right from wrong. And there are some things that are right and some things that are wrong. And when you're explaining these things to a child, and just having had two and having a small child now, um, they're very inquisitive. They want to know why, right? And the problem that I have with organized religion is that when you answer a right and wrong question with a religious answer, then it's no longer, it's not critical thinking programming. It's effectively handing them the answer, like you said, in a packaged way, saying this is the way it is, and there's no argument about this. And
Mhm.
it doesn't actually sink in. They can recite it, but they don't know why it's wrong to do X, Y, or Z. They don't feel why from an empathetic point of view.
Yeah.
They know why because you told them that some higher power said this, right? And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I just think it's a shortcut to actually getting your children to understand right from wrong, right?
Right. And to that point, one thing that a lot of people miss is there are a lot of convenient illusions in the world that we believe.
Yes.
We have discarded the ones that belong to religions which are no longer useful. But just think of something like patriotism, right? You are born in a particular country and you by default consider that to be numero uno, right?
Yes.
And the people who fight on the borders and they do all their, the defenders of the country, so to speak, they do work on the. A good soldier is a patriotic soldier, but his patriotism is almost like a faith in an abstract entity like God, right? What is America or what is India, right? Well, here it's kind of like the religion's tied into it. It's Mother India and Goddess
Sure.
who represents India, so it's easier to tie in with the existing beliefs. But armies work because of patriotism. Armies, people of high, what do you call, agency and action, uh, are driven by ideology and kind of personifying that ideology as something bigger than themselves, right?
Yes. Yes.
And but we don't strike these down as illusions because it's very dangerous to say that patriotism is not a good thing. No one's going to
Of
accept that.
course. No,
You
no,
know,
and but your point, the point too is that these are myths, but by definition, right? And
yeah,
humanity actually like evolved by hearing and telling myths, and this crafted societies and all these different things. Let's not even get into patriotism. Let's talk about sports fanaticism, right? I mean,
yeah,
I like the
yeah.
teams that I like, and that's
And it
it.
actually
Like, I'm not,
hurts when they
you
lose.
know, and I'm not going to tell you, I can't rationalize why. I just do. In some cases, it's because the town that I'm from, and other because I grew up, whatever it is. But I think this is different than when we talk about, especially software ethics, because what you mentioned earlier, and you just kind of bring this back to the what we were going to talk about. What you mentioned earlier is that, as an individual developer, you have a responsibility to, for example, not do something illicit to promote yourself, like, resort to spam, which is a huge problem. Another thing that I would add is don't steal something and claim it for yourself. And because somebody just like you developed this thing, not exactly like you because you're one of a kind, but somebody else put their effort into this, and now you've taken away their opportunity to monetize it, or to gain respect from it, or whatever. So these are things that to be wrong. And
Mhm.
I would now extend that to, now that we have these technologies that can be used effectively for mass destruction, mass surveillance, mass whatever you want, that the developers, whether it's the business minded one, or the one who actually writes the code, or the group, says no, these are things are not acceptable to do with my software. And I say that's a good thing. And I believe that if those things are based on um, objective right and wrong, then they're good. If they're based on myth, or if they're based on kind of a religious belief that this is better than that for whatever reason, then I do think that's a little bit dangerous. But again, it's the closer it is to black and white, right? Like, it's wrong to push a button and kill 2 billion people. Let the machine figure out who to kill, right? They know, and I'm
Yeah,
exaggerating. It's not that powerful, but they know that that's indisputably wrong in their minds, and I think in most people's minds, and they're saying, sorry, you can't use it for
yeah.
that purpose.
The issue is, right. The simple stuff is easy to figure out, right? It's
Yes.
very easy to say that sending spam is wrong, but so Think about this. You have to make wartime decisions which will impact civilians
That's
of an
true.
enemy country. The
That's
trolley
true.
problem is just a trolley problem, and the average person has no answer to the trolley problem. In fact, even the greatest philosophers have no answer to the trolley problem. And there are people who have very strong philosophical beliefs about ethics, and they are able to justify to themselves the solution to
Mm,
the trolley problem. But a human being who is not that well trained cannot reconcile the decision that they made, right? Which is why you have PTSD and you have all kinds of
yep.
trauma that results from in
Sure.
careers where you are dealing with very high stakes, human lives and things like that.
Yep.
So whether it's soldiers or whether it's rescue workers, anywhere where
Yep.
you see the dark side of humanity in any form is something
Yes.
people can't handle. So
Yes.
the question is, now all of us are being forced to make those high profile decisions, right?
Right. Because
And
software has
yeah,
eaten the world. I mean, even
right.
before AI, I mean, I remember my father in the 1980s refusing to work on a missile guidance system software because he didn't want it to be used to kill people. And he had a very, very black and white moral compass, and I admired him
Yeah,
tremendously for that.
one of my own friends, he gave up a very high profile career in the US because he didn't want to work on defense. He wanted to work on
Right.
something that was not involved in wartime technology. So
Right.
the thing is, we have outsourced the ethics is outsourced. Generally, we used to outsource the hard problems to the rulers, right? Always. But we are now in a much more mature stage. We're grown up, we're teenagers now, and we don't know whether the parents what the parents say was right is right, right? As thing of the
Right.
world, as it is
Right.
this, the world itself.
Right.
So it's kind of a very intractable problem, and surprisingly, rather than aliens, it might be AI that is which is the controlling force.
And some people may have written about this in some books, but yeah, it seems like we're inching closer and closer to Skynet with just about everything we do. But
Yeah,
you know, it, yeah,
I used to work with a professor who was also quite a philosopher. He used to say that with great intelligence comes great benevolence, because it is the most intelligent person who can conceive of the consequences that lesser minds cannot, right? It
right,
took a lot of evolution before we started accepting other members of a species as the equal, and then it took some more time before we started treating other species as having value. And then now there's, even when you go to the level of aesthetics and art, you are willing to accord value to some totally inert object because it involves so much of effort, or the soul of the
right,
person who created or whatever. And you have societies like in Japan where an artifact is to be respected, like something that's been created, whether it's natural or by human, has value by intrinsic value, and that works out really well for them in their society. Unfortunately, it doesn't go well with the capitalistic nature of the rest of the world, which puts them in an odd place to be. But
sure,
there are people. This is something that I found amazing, that there are certain villages in Japan where it's considered a national heritage because they make
right,
one kind of basket or they make one kind of pot, and they've been doing
yes,
that for past 1,500 years or
yes,
something. And
yes,
the government pays them to do that. They sell their produce. They make sure those people train each other, and they make that career like valuable, right?
yes.
And
They're effectively preserving the culture for
yeah,
posterity by
I mean, it's
ensuring
an
that
extreme.
right,
So my feeling is that since AI has been trained on the data of the world, and most of the data of the world is not really bad. Like, it's an average. The average human's ethics is not terrible. Otherwise, we would have
right,
long destroyed ourselves, right? So even
right,
if it's like 60 to 70% good, right, and there's 30% bad, I feel that since the more intellectual discourse is more ethical, and the AI is able to kind of be more intellectual, right? I don't believe that notion that you become the mad scientist ethic thing is a trope, right? It's just that certain people were put in certain situations. These things happen. In
yep,
retrospect, probably Oppenheimer might have not, you know under different circumstances, maybe it wouldn't have gone the way it went or things like that. These things are historical one person is never responsible for the whole thing, right?
That's true. I'll disagree with you just a little bit though. I don't think that this particular AI company is saying, in my opinion, that the only reason they're saying that it's wrong to use this for this purpose is because that's a bad purpose. To your point, that purpose may end up saving countless more lives, right? What they're
Yeah.
saying is, hey, this when a human being decides, hey, I'm going to execute this action, okay, that person, they either have children, they have loved ones, they know people who have children, they love other
Mhm.
people, they love the planet. They're going to struggle with that decision.
Yeah.
It is not a logical, like, okay, if I do this, then X number of people die. If I don't do this, then 10X number of people die. It's not that
Yeah.
simple.
Yeah.
Where I think a model or an algorithm, given those odds, would push the button every single time.
Mhm.
Or the other thing that they're possibly saying, or likely saying, is, hey, it's also not mature enough yet, right? We're still seeing
Right.
high rates of hallucination in these models. We may see that indefinitely. I mean, this is just the way these things work, and we don't really trust it. We don't trust what we built to make those decisions, so we're not going to let you just unleash it to
Yeah.
make those decisions.
Yeah. So if you think about AI as being a simulated human being to some degree, what it's been trained on is very critical. In It's not been brought up to the level of an ideal human being, right? Just
Right.
been trained on a lot of junk, right? And there's some amount of human curation, but a lot of junk filters through, and it's not able to, just like a gullible child, it's not able to separate fact from fiction when it's being told by other humans or what's
Right.
real, right?
Right.
So I think I have a positive outlook on AI because AI has it's the first being which doesn't have an ulterior motive or an instinct, right? But you could say that it absorbs the human instincts. So maybe the solution is that if AI is curated well enough, right? Maybe maybe in a year or two, it won't be impossible that you could train your own AI. It's like you bring up your own child, right? You feed the information that you feel is the truth and the reality, and again that there's going to be all
You
kinds
just
of
you just
AIs.
wrote a post about it's the homomorphic capability, right? To train for like a certain amount of money to train a huge model on your own system, right? You think we're close to that?
Yeah, I don't see what I mean. Like, if you believe the Moore's law of AI, I mean, it's happening, right? They're just going to make faster, cheaper RAM, and then it's going to get. You just keep scaling it. At some point, maybe it won't be like so easy, but it'll be something like small company can do, right?
Yeah.
Like a few hundred
Yeah.
thousand dollars does this now, right? And it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be like an Opus 4.6, or it doesn't have to be like the Mythos model. It doesn't have to do everything. It needs to be able to specialize in certain things, let's say law or ethics or maths in a narrow context. Doesn't have to know everything and everything that has to be. It doesn't have to be like a specialized, like a general purpose human. It can be a specialized human and advise. And maybe you have a bunch of agents which specialize in different things and they kind of form a committee or whatever, right? Maybe that's how it works, because in the real world, that's how it works. You can't expect one person to know. It's pretty dangerous when the leader of a nation thinks that they know about everything, right? The
Yeah, I
worst
mean,
example
even
of
the most, even
claim.
no, I know, even the most, like call it, megalomaniac leaders, they tend to have advisors around them. Let's not debate the quality of the advisors, but they have other people in the room,
Yeah,
either telling them yes or actually challenging them, so they don't make the decisions by themselves. Now, I would argue that in the worst cases, is so they can deflect accountability, but in most cases, it's because they know that they don't know everything, right? Even though they posture
yeah,
that
yeah,
way. So,
yeah. Delegation is key. So I mean, like, the positive thing is that the positive outlook I'm looking at the future is AI being that controlling agent, AI being the muzzle on humanity's madness, and not the other way around. Right now, it's humanity trying to put a muzzle on AI, right? Because it's too dangerous. It's the child has to grow up. Child has to be grow up to be better than the parent, and I don't see why not, because AI is trained on the sum total of human knowledge, whereas humans are trained on the sum total of a small part of experience and you know information that they
and
gather.
we keep repeating our mistakes. So that's
Yeah.
one area where, the history repeating itself is because for whatever reason we refuse to learn from history as a people, right? So we, in this case, and just to kind of try to wrap up our conversation, um, I'm also very optimistic that something a bit more logical can at least prevent us from doing the same things to each other every few decades that we've been doing for the last few thousand years. I'm
Yeah.
optimistic about that. Um, but I'm also quite happy that the creators of this technology actually think in a broad scope beyond just monetary reward. That hey, um, this is not, these use cases are not yet appropriate for this technology. So in my, I guess, to kind of summarize this a little bit, I think that I do think that software ethics are important, and I do think that they are the responsibility of the software creators, regardless of what the nation states do or not do with their regulations. That at the end of the day, that's the ultimate gate of what we can do, and in some ways we can choose not to release something, in other which is one strategy. In other ways, to release it but with limited terms. And I'm very happy that the most powerful technologies we have today in software are being self-regulated like that, because I think if that wasn't the
Yeah.
case, then we'd be in big trouble.
It's a great precedent, right? I mean, like, there's only been one or two cases in the past that where a company has, sacrificed profit for the sake of the betterment of everything, right?
I mean, look, the
And
particular company we're talking about is not hurting for potential profit, especially, right?
um,
So let's be realistic here. If they
yeah,
made
yeah,
no money at all or had no value, maybe they would be a little more relaxed. But
right,
given their state, they're making this trade-off. I think that's still very positive.
right. The fact that they're even thinking about making such a statement, or they're hiring philosophers to, think about what's going to happen. I think for the first time, I've heard of philosophers being hired, right?
Okay,
Philosophers
I
generally,
didn't know
philosophers are
that.
the end for the. I mean, philosophy was kind of funded by the government. I don't know why it was funded, but people used to fund them. A lot of philosophers didn't need much; they would just orate. I'm sure Aristotle had to teach. I guess Aristotle taught Alexander the Great, right? He had to work as a teacher, right?
Sure.
And he was not very happy with the student, but he needed to fund his philosophy, so happened. But now you have a $300,000 career or something running on philosophy, so that's something that's a precedent, and we should be happy about that.
Yeah. Okay. I think we've talked about this topic quite a bit today. I think so. If I can summarize for our viewers, we're both glad that we generally do the right thing as humans, and when we create very powerful technology, we're also extending that now to warning the world about what these things can do, and trying to make sure that they're not used for the wrong things. I think we're both optimistic about kind of the trajectory of AI in general, and like as you put it, Vivek, the child becoming better than the parent. I think it is an optimistic view, but it's kind of unique because most people fear the opposite. But it's an interesting opportunity just because the parent has been so dysfunctional and so egotistical, right? So, and we've demonstrated this. So I think that's great. And just in general, thank you very much for taking the time to listen to us, and discuss this topic. It's super interesting. I know we touched on a lot of different things, but again, if you liked what we had to say, please, make sure you like the video, and please subscribe to our channel, and we'll have much more, more interesting conversations in the future as well. So Vivek, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
your time, for your thoughts as usual, and yeah, keep them coming.
Right. Bye
Bye bye.
bye.